Hi there, it's good to see you again. In this video, we're going to summarize this season's Spacetime Elapse Youga. I've been practicing gradually, and now I've reached level 100. Right now, I have 6 build codes. These builds are great for starting out, when you have almost nothing, and slowly progressing by farming gear, trading, and gradually moving towards the final version of the build. The final version is already done. There is still room for improvement, but there is. However, I've been through so many seasons that you guys know I won't waste tens of thousands of FE just to chase a tiny improvement. It might cost tens of thousands of FE just to get a little bit better. So my build usually focuses on choosing high cost performance ratio items as long as it can handle all the content and feels good to play. It's fast and has enough defense to avoid sudden deaths. I often sacrifice some damage to pursue better gameplay and defense. Over many seasons, if you've watched my videos, you'll see this approach. Here, I have 6 build codes. I've covered some of these builds in earlier videos, but here are 2 more build codes. For Spacetime Elapse Youga late game speed farming and the final version, I'll post these in the comments later. One is for speed farming with eternity, and the other is a crafted necklace. I found that after dropping eternity, the crafted necklace isn't much slower in terms of speed, since blur gives a lot of movement speed. The difference isn't significant. Plus, the crafted necklace has better stats and defense compared to eternity. It's also more adaptable. Eternity isn't cheap, and some of you might not want to spend thousands of FE on it. Crafting a necklace is fine too. I've sold my eternity already, and I find that the crafted version is better. Since this video is long, I'll break it into 3 or 4 shorter videos. In each short video, I'll go over some detailed aspects, so you guys can understand how to build cost-effective builds without aiming for the absolute perfect endgame gear with all effects, like for T0 or 5T0. Instead, I'll focus on the most affordable and cost-effective way to build your character. First, let's talk about DPS tests. So, let's start with a DPS test. Some of you really enjoy DPS tests, so let's take a look at the results. Actually, you can see it's really fast. It keeps jumping from 0.5 to the top. We're aiming for frequency, cooldown, and reaping. I'll look for these in the gear later. Snapshotting is something I've already explained in a previous video. First, prelude, cast skills, then you snapshot, and the defense is around 1 million. You can see from the buffs. The defense and blur don't drop. The curse stays up too. It's really comfortable. Just keep running while clearing maps. Enter the map, cast Shadow Shot, cast Swamp, and keep running. That's it. Full Pack Spirit. Some of you might worry about DPS Pack Spirit, but these are just regular drop Pack Spirit. If they were DPS Pack Spirit, they'd be even stronger. Okay? So the DPS test is done. I won't demonstrate map clearing, because with this speed, you guys who have seen my previous builds know that it's really fast. Alright? Let's get to the main part. Since I'll be doing this in segments, let's start with the basic talents. In the next video, I'll cover more details on the trait and slate. Okay, let's start with the talents. Goddess of Deception 3-piece talent standard. Players with the Goddess of Deception 3-piece set will encounter many questions. Should I switch to Steel Vanguard, or should I switch to Magister to get Barrier of Radiance? And the Magister has a shell in front, which can add a shield, and also take the damage bonus from Focus Blessing. These are all useful. Here, there's also low shield dragon, which is very critical. The answer is yes. Because my slate is Barrier of Radiance, so my third talent is definitely going for damage output. Warlock. First, the Warlock gives prelude and stab in the back, and can bring nearly 1.3 times 1.5, nearly 1.8 additional damage. And in the Warlock tree, there's a very comfortable Empire. 27 plus 13.5 adds up to over 40. So compared to that, I can achieve over 40 through talents. And the big talent, Knowledgeable, only gives 55. I feel it's not worth it. And the reason for choosing Knowledgeable here is, early on, the resistance is not enough for players. You may need to find it here, but later in the mid to late game, resistance is more than enough. So plan it out, and think about resistance while building. And season forging is relatively simple. Resistance can be rolled. For example, if you have T1 lightning resistance, you can roll it into T1 erosion resistance, cold resistance, fire resistance, which are relatively cheap. It's easy to get resistance. While forging, I'll talk about it in the gear later. How to piece together resistance under the condition of meeting resistance. Personally, I feel like some players or some streamers recommend Steel Vanguard, but you can also go with what I've played with, and I feel like using Barrier of Radiance with Slate allows you to use Warlock here if your Slate is more offensive, like Warlocks. For example, stab in the back, such as Rush the Shadows, enhancing Slate's damage. Then you won't choose Steel Vanguard for the third talent. You definitely choose Magister to gain low shield dragon and Barrier of Radiance. With this combination, combining this way, Slate can avoid low shield dragon and look for other output or defense. For the best attribute points, when in Slate, it's more flexible. Bring the talents down a bit here, abandon shield here, abandon range here, because you won't need these later on. As they won't be needed later on. Specifics will be discussed in traits later, so this episode is longer, to be divided. Otherwise it'll be tiring for viewers. Talent, just put 5 points here for shield. Actually, you could add 5 points. 9 plus 5 equals 14. 9 plus 8 equals 17. So choose here. That's the reason. Put a little in wilt here. We'll discuss this point in skills later. It's very important. Of course, if you have basic wilt in Slate or necklace, you don't need to put points here. You can put them here. Okay, let's bring it down. First, it's essential to poison relief. Some friends might choose forbidden power because their early gear isn't good. But it reduces resistance by 15. You might want to find elemental resistance in the necklace to compensate for this loss later on. Late game, because the damage is already locked in. It doesn't matter which damage you choose. Of course, choose to stack. It's a bit more profitable. The Psychic's Affliction of the second talent of the day. Actually, the extra 30 is not crucial. The key is the plus 10. Affliction per second. Rate Purification. You can also choose this, because Rate Purification is almost the same in the late game. Let me try it with teammates. For example, if I don't use Rate Purification, you can still jump to 0.3, 0.4, but you can see the frequency is not as high. So this is also why you should use Rate Purification in Spacetime Elapse Youga. At Terra, like the Wisdom of the Gods Dia, don't use Rate Purification. The main core is still Rate Purification. Pulling the talent here. Let's talk about a few key points. Still the same old way. Range excluded. Pointing evasion here. Because there's about 6,000 evasion on me. Evasion brings this season's strength and evasion. Actually, over 50 evasion bonus is quite good for defense. Here at the highest ink, over 100 ink, because it's harder to find ink this season. So in the case of difficulty in finding, this over 100 ink may be equivalent to 20 or 30 more bonuses. It's not bad, better than this 6% point. Because these 6 points can be completely moved here, but when you calculate it carefully, these two bring, you add up all the ink you already have, and then compare it to how much 100 is in percentage terms. It's equivalent to how much more in percentage terms. If you really calculate it, it's almost. I've calculated that over 100 ink is probably over 20 or 30 more, around there. Better than this question style. Cooldowns are all recommended to be maxed out. The reason is, firstly, in terms of skills, because without range, there's a duration problem. Cooldowns provide activation medium. Wind Rhythm increases the frequency of wind projection trigger. Standard cooldown reaping is a very precious effect, hard to find elsewhere. Adding frequency, when damage is sufficient, look for cooldown reaping. Add affliction here, mainly to affliction. Affliction effect, reducing resistance is better than nothing. Warlock standard configuration, point to points in sealed mana here. If your teammate has it in the Slate, you don't need to point it. Put it on Empire instead. The reason is not for increased damage, but for faster movement. Similarly, these 5 points are also for faster movement. So here, with these 6 plus 5 points, it's purely for map clearing service in the late game. There's no need for output. If necessary, you can give shields, increase survivability, etc. But it's not necessary. The main focus is still on feel, so put cooldowns on, all skill levels +1, and defense, the 100th level point allocation. But there are many little things you can adjust yourself after finishing the talents. Let's talk about the slates. You can talk about talent slates together. The slate we choose is Barrier of Radiance. It's very early to find one with Resolve. If you don't have Resolve, it doesn't matter, just Barrier of Radiance will do. But if you want to find another one later, you can, not necessarily. If you want to, you can find something relatively cost-effective. Same as mine. I suggest following your instincts. Anything goes. Do whatever you want. You can also put some of these. A corner of divinity in here. Some of they are essentials. Just Barrier of Radiance here. Look for things like range. We'll find agility blessing +1. If it's relatively cheap, you can put it here. Then free up the pedigree of gods here. You can see my slate is very cheap. No use. Stuff like mod fire is relatively expensive. The reason is, in terms of cost effectiveness, it's already enough, and it's already very enjoyable. There's absolutely no need to go for new god, morph fire, and other messy stuff like that. Although the damage may be high, there's no point if you can't survive without Barrier of Radiance. The slate only recommends Barrier of Radiance. Otherwise, find something relatively cost-effective on your own. Now let's talk about the corner of divinity and major talents. These few most important points, you can go find them yourself. First, area. Agility. You don't necessarily have to find these two. You can mix and match freely. You will understand physical paralysis and low shield charge. And take all the blessings. Take the tenacity blessing, mainly to increase the tenacity blessing, increase defense, and use defensive skills to consume the tenacity blessing. Here, minus 12% additional elemental damage taken is just a random choice. You can find it yourself. I chose it because it's relatively cheap. Goddess of Deception's divinity can be slowly branded by yourself. Anyway, materials are basically maxed out by each player. Branding with double skill levels like this, because of the additional existence of some other professions, resulting in 3 extra blessings, is very expensive, basically 3 or 4,000 FA. Then it's not necessary. You can find it here. Of course, you can find it in the corner at Divinity Corner. A corner at Divinity Corner may cost a few hundred FEs. You can also find it here. Look here. Find something useful below. You can find something with about 100 FA. Just brand it yourself. As long as it works. You don't have to go for new card. I only go for what's usable. Anything goes. Recap the key points. Physical paralysis can be used with Shadow Shot to deal physical damage. Extra 10%. Some buddies said, among the Goddess of Deception, aren't there curse paralysis abilities? Yes. Here, if it's 3+1, you can put 4 points. If there are more than 4 points in the talent, you can also put them here. But for example, if you deduct evasion and put it here, then you can unlock physical paralysis. You can find that here. So, it's like you free up a corner of divinity. Do you understand what I mean? These are relatively good points, so I've listed them out myself. Of course, players can go find them themselves. A corner of divinity is relatively cheaper than Fallen Starlight. That's why I recommend corner of divinity. Go for +1 agility blessing and 3 extra blessings to complement the shoes. To increase the output frequency, this line of thinking, and the slate, when you add them up, don't go look for resolve with barrier of radiance, and these miscellaneous things. Altogether shouldn't exceed 1000 FE. It should definitely work out. A very cost-effective set of slates. Okay, so those are the details about paralysis and such. Alright, that wraps up the talent and slate selection for this issue.